Hello, TEDx. Good to see you. What are you having? Is it a boy or a girl? It took me about 6 months to finally realize people didn't actually care about what I was having for lunch, but rather they were insistent to know the sex of my bump. Now, quite frankly, yeah, there it is. Quite frankly, everyone in this room will want to know the sex of my bump because you'll want to know what section in the baby aisle to shop in. Or quite frankly, perhaps it's this inherent need to classify, identify, and understand where an individual belongs. Boys aisle, girls aisle, pink or blue, ballet or football. Identity, an 8-letter word used to describe or imply a sense of self, where we do or do not fit in, which group we will join, which group we will actually avoid, and we gain a sense of positive identity from our self-esteem, and especially within groups. And this furthers a sense of community and also belonging. Now, here's a challenge for all of you here today. I want you to think about the following categories. Okay? So man, woman, girl, boy, poor, old, rich, young, gay, straight, able, disabled, migrant, refugee, Muslim, Christian, and how these categories both enable and constrain our sense of self. And what does it really mean to self-identify with one or more of these categories? Now, my own identity making has very much been influenced by my parents raising us in countries outside of their origin. Now, because of this, I'm constantly looking at ways to move beyond these categories or define categories. Now, as mentioned before, my daughter is not even born yet, and her identity has already taken form. It's a girl! Girls are easier. Did you want a boy? Will you raise your daughter to be Greek, Canadian, German, Cypriot? A lot of people get really concerned about this. Yeah. So already the term girl implies certain connotations, right? Being easier to handle as infants, dressing up girls is much more fun, and of course, she becomes a girl. And not just a girl with multiple nationalities, right? So this begs the question, who is she going to be? And so many people will continue to ask me, where is she from? Now, this is just the beginning of a variety of assumptions that you and I have actually learned through our communities and our society and our groups as to how the story of a boy or girl is going to look like. Now, my story begins something like this, okay? Right. That was my mom going, oh my gosh, she wasn't prepared for the pictures that we're showing here. I was born in Athens by Cypriot parents whose decision of where we would live was primarily dictated by the consequences of conflict. Now, I spent a year in Athens where my family and I were considered immigrants. We spent a year or so in Athens, and then we moved to Dominican Republic until I was 2. And we were expats or internationals, and that sounds quite nice. Then my father would finally get a job with a Canadian firm and move my brother and my mom and I to Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. Now, my mother tells the story of holding my brother and I in each arm, crying in front of the Niagara Falls, wondering what on earth the young woman with her beautiful blown-out hair and her fabulous ballet flats was doing in such freezing, plummeting temperatures that I think would make all of us here today cry. Now, I have to mention, as a proud daughter of Cypriot parents, yeah, that's right, we spent our summers in Cyprus once a year visiting our grandparents in a Cypriot village, as all good Cypriots of the diaspora tend to do. Now, we would spend a year or so in Canada until the company would actually station us in Ghana, West Africa. And in Ghana, I was so privileged enough to have the opportunity to be exposed to diverse cultures, music, religions, languages, and of course, a melting pot of mixed identities. And it was through this international school that I got this opportunity to do so, this exposure. So when we immigrated to Canada at the age of 15, I would learn some pretty difficult lessons. And those were lessons of belonging, of race, ethnicity, and of course, identity. And the fact that skin color actually does matter. Now, I would spend these awkward years of my teenagehood trying to find the perfect foundation for my olive complexion. That happened to be a burnt sort of amber from the African sun. And in fact, when I went to the drugstore to find a foundation color, it was either too pink or too orange. And it became an obsession of mine throughout my early 20s to try to find the perfect skin color, especially in a country that actually prided itself on diversity and multiculturalism. And I'm happy to announce that I finally found my perfect color from more progressive makeup lines, but anyhow. Now, questions of where are you from were being asked of me almost daily. You don't have an accent, do you? You lived in Africa? My answer would vary, because if I said Cyprus, most people wouldn't know where that was, unfortunately, in Canada. And of course, I never lived there, so I would say Ghana. But you're not black. And I would say, I'm Canadian, but... So I became what is known as a third culture kid, or a TCK. And that is a person that has been raised outside of their parents' country of origin or roots. Now, in my university years, I would jump into the academic world of social anthropology and sociology and gender studies, and I also had the audacity to join the African Students Association and the Hellenic Association and the Cyprus Students Club. Of course, mixing and matching was completely frowned upon. Yeah. Now, at university, I would understand the world that kept needing to place me very safely in these boxes or categories, such as immigrant, white, no wait, black, no wait, exotic looking, woman, Cypriot, Greek, heterosexual, single, married, divorced. Now, Professor Daniel Yan from York University, Social Anthropology Department, wrote one of my favorite books on ethnography in a Toronto high school and identity. And I'm going to share my favorite quote with you today. And it's by a student named Margaret, and it goes something like this. At one point, I thought of myself as a black person. And that limits me, because as a black person, there are things I'm supposed to be. But I'm not just black. I'm a woman, and that limits me as well. But if I think that I am limited, I don't dare risk anything, and I don't dare do anything. So bust being black and bust being a woman. I love the last line. I love it. I love it because in my passionate quest for my own identity and sense of self, I do so at a time that everything around me externally is defined, such as class, nation, gender, ethnicity. So it is no accident that after years of ongoing studies and living and working abroad, that I've somehow planted my roots here in Cyprus. Now, my current research for my PhD is both political and personal. And I'm looking at the way women's groups on the island are working towards peace and reconciliation. But most importantly, they're defying essentialist, homogeneous, heteronormative, and also heterosexist ways of peacemaking. So the peacemaking that we're all familiar with. And they're going beyond that and defining those terms, which is something that really excites me. So one's identity becomes solidly defined. And whether you fit in or not, it can be pretty uncomfortable if you don't conform. So instead of identity being this thing that's fluid, that we actually allow to happen through our life experiences and things that we go through, it becomes very fixed and very tight in space. So breaking out of this identity label is no way, shape, or form easy. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience, and a lot of self-reflection. But in my own experiences, through my own multi-ethnic environments, I've actually learned to look outside the box. Now, there's another way to look at identity as a process that I want to share with you today. And it's ongoing. Identity can be fragmented, it can be multiple, contradictory. And if you haven't had everything figured out, it can also be unresolved. Now, it raises a lot of critical questions about the complexities and the relationships that we have with each other, but most importantly, the relationships that we actually have with ourselves. Now, identity is rather elusive, okay? It could be slippery. It could be ever evolving and changing. But what are the ways that we make and create our own identity? When I think about my own need for constant independence from constraining categories that I've mentioned here today, or categories that tell me what I can and cannot do or be, I'm doing so at a time where all around me, categories of wife, mother, career woman are being thrown at me. So you see, my partner has asked me to marry him, and we're planning a wedding, yes. So now for me, the meaning of wife elicits a bipolar response. Because, yeah, having been a wife before, there are things a wife ought to be. And I am none of those things. Okay? Yeah. For me, on one hand, it implies belonging to someone, being part of another half, but it also implies a sense of female salvation or damnation, captivity, but also rescue, right? And it's the limited role that the identity of wife or the role of wife implies that actually makes me uncomfortable. And so that's something I'm working through. Yeah. But what I do know for sure is this, okay? Is that we actually have the freedom to move beyond and to get unstuck, if necessary, our own identity, despite what role we end up playing, okay? And if we're going to get unstuck, it's crucial that we move beyond the wife box, or the man box, or the woman box, or whatever box you keep putting yourself in or placing yourself in. Now, this leads me back to my unborn child. She will be raised in a country where her parents, one of which is a German living in Cyprus, the other an Athenian-born Cypriot parents raised in Ghana, Canada, Dominican Republic. So what does this mean? Should she get stuck in what box or category? Should she focus on categories? But rather, I want to challenge her to focus on values of generosity and patience and integrity and honesty. Now, I wrote this talk for one person, and hopefully when she's older, she'll watch it. Thank you.